So we now begin our final panel of today called Digital Construction Tools, Weapons for Claims or Dispute Eliminators. Moderated by myself, our panel for this session is Dr. Stacy Sinclair, partner at Fenwick, Elliott, Michael Lawrence, co-founder of Insite and founder of Bloqwork, Alain Waha, global lead BIM and digital transformation at BuroHappold, May Winfield, associate director, BuroHappold Engineering, and Shawkat Abbas, regional director of claims and contract solutions Middle East at Arcadis. I think we'll start with, I think, a big question, a broad question. Alain and Stacy, I'll ask you two first. Is there enough transparency at the outset of contract discussions between all departments? We're here to talk about if construction technology can help prevent the situation where claims arise, but is the scene set on this from the point of procurement? So Alain first.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. Before we're talking about weaponizing, the idea of doing better in construction is starts with better processes, because otherwise you're just digitizing the old way. And we have a lot of evidence now to say that better processes will be enabled by digital tools, better tools, but fundamentally also contractual enablers, and those are fundamental. And so they need to be in lockstep, and without the change process, the change technologies, you must do the legal changes, and that's why you call Stacy and May.
So, Stacy, I think that was over to you.
That would be me. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, from legal or otherwise, if you want your success on a project, if you want things to go smoothly, if you want to prevent those claims, for me, it's all about communication and clarity. What have the parties agreed? What are the expectations? What are the liabilities? Particularly, I mean, we're here to discuss technology, but with new technologies, it's really important that everybody understands what's the outcomes, what are there new deliverables, are there new, what's supposed to happen. And I think, if you just leave it for the legal team to be separate to that process, personally, I think you're kind of asking for it. I mean, so often you see an in-house legal team separate, to the project team, and they might just be called in to rubber stamp a contract or just tidy it up. And more so now, I think we are seeing that collaborative team effort where the legal team is, or legal advisors, whoever that might be, is brought along the process and can advise, during the course. I'm sure we'll come on to the point of data, but a lot of people, I think, you get the data right and that's going to, tell you the truth, as it were. We're starting to see cases now where there's competing sets of data, and one set of data says one thing, the other says the other, and what have the parties agreed? Which sets of data are you going to use? Which set of data will you get, paid against? So yeah, I think it's about communication and collaboration, and the more you can build your team at the outset, I think the better.
So what you're saying is that actually the legal department needs to be much more embedded with the planning and the project department.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're agreeing certain things that legally may not be in your best interest, or you don't actually, tie it all together, you could face problems later on. I mean, there's one case that was just heard in the judge's judgment just came out in the UK courts, where the parties hadn't agreed what set of data would be used for paying labor. A party was engaged to provide labor to a rather large project, and it wasn't agreed as to how they were paid on an hourly basis, and it wasn't agreed what set of data would be used to evidence those hours. There was timesheets, there was turnstile data. That data didn't align. Arguments about whether or not the turnstiles were working and you know, whatever. Ultimately, they brought in biometric clocks. Now the data with the biometric clocks, the turnstile data, and the timesheets all said 3 different things, but it hadn't been agreed at the outset what was going to be used to evidence, you know, those hours. And, you know, they ended up in the courts. So, you know, getting things right from the outset.
And I think it's you know, very fundamental. Ultimately, you know, to shorten it to a soundbite, you know, if you digitize the old process, you'll just make the same mistakes but faster. And I think the purpose of this panel is to say, how do we avoid the old mistakes? And we've known since the 90s, when Stanford did the studies, that ultimately we needed to reintegrate the construction process that has essentially become this contracting processes of cutting things up. At each cutting action, you creating an interface and a new risk. So the only way you're going to actually deliver better, and that's, you know, before you've deployed any technology, is integrated project delivery or collaborative delivery, and that means a new process. And we have the evidence that the new process is enabled and fundamentally must be created by a new contract environment. If you do not set up a contract environment where people can behaviorally operate differently, make an integrated process work, you're back to square one. You say, I want to do that. I want to be collaborative. I want to be integrated, but the contract ultimately holds me to my deliverable is a piece of paper that describes this, not more, not less. I can't change it. You'll have to pay me if something changes in the boundary condition. You've from the beginning enshrined in your contract a disaggregated process which is inefficient. Digitize it, it will be equally inefficient. And in fact, that's why we talk about weaponizing the industry with BIM. If you want me to be inefficient and really overwhelm you at those interfaces with digital, I have a computer, I apply design rule in this computer, I will overwhelm you if you have a piece of paper. That's what we mean by a weapon, but actually we should be focusing on doing better, and doing better starts with the contract enabler saying, let's have an integrated process delivery.
So Shawkat and Michael, I think what Alain and Stacy are talking about really is transparency, transparency between all the parties. So how do you see technology helping here in terms of introducing that transparency? Are there certain technologies you think are essential so that you don't get to that point where later on there's a dispute because everything has been logged properly? Everything, as Stacy said, you don't end up with 3 systems saying different things about how long people have been working for, because you've all agreed that from one system and it's answerable. So Shawkat.
Well, I mean, to simplify what is a concept of a contract, I mean, basically a contract is a set of documents, drawings, contract conditions, specifications, which contain triggers and certain inputs together with a mechanism that is kind of describing a deal between 2 parties. It's kind of saying, okay, if you do this, we will give you that. So in terms of the inputs, and that's where the technology helps to begin with. It's predefining what the inputs are, which is a combination of the project information systems, where it could contain all the documents with predefined triggers, in addition to BIM. And if you combine that with the smart contract mechanism, then yes, all that will provide transparency. And what do I mean by that? That means that all the parties would know at the beginning what the formula is. The employer would know what the formula is for him to pay the contractor, and the contractor will know what he needs to do in a transparent manner. So it's kind of a way to predefine the triggers, have them on technologically on some platform where everyone knows that, okay, this is the list of inspection requests, and they can follow through the logic of, okay, if this is done, then the one party can pay another for something specific. So everyone can see, everyone can look at see what's happening in terms of the BIM model, in terms of the progress, in terms of the documents. This will allow, given that there is a predefined formula, that there is minimal or no disputes at all, because everything's predefined beforehand. No one can dispute whether a trigger has been done or not, especially if it's automated.
So I guess, Michael, you're really looking after a technology that I think is seen as the future in terms of transparency in this industry.
Yeah.
Now, I don't really want to go into smart contracts and things like that right now, because that's something I want to ask about later. But in terms of the use of blockchain here, what would you advise? What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, in terms of disputes, it comes down to you have to have the evidence. You have to have the evidence to back you up and to back your case up. And we've all seen cases which appear very, very strong, but unfortunately one of the parties or the other can't produce all of the data and all of the backup. And this is what we're looking at in terms of resolving with technologies. Now, there's plenty of cloud-based systems out there which do a very good job of that. But what they tend to do is they centralize all of that data. Now, it is one potential solution. The only thing I would say is that with that, when a party gets into dispute, they can't agree even about which hotel they're going to meet at. They cannot agree anything. So when it comes down to what system is going to be used in a contract situation, that needs to be very specifically defined at the outset and put into the contract documents, made very clear that everybody's working from the same basis. The problem I have about cloud-based systems and the reason I'm interested perhaps in a blockchain solution is I think when you look at data and you look at centralized data for different purposes, when you're looking at collaboration, I think a centralized solution is very clear, and it's what everybody wants. But when it comes down to disputes, you need to think about who's paid for that data, who owns that data. If you're the contractor, are you going to be reliant on data which is on a system which has been paid for and supplied for by the employer? I've had instances on projects when the system's gone down because the employer has some sort of a framework agreement which he's been negotiating, and the system's gone down, and you get an email which says, please use email and everything for the meantime, because and you find out that there's some sort of issue there. Now, what that results in is duplication of data, because then the contractor or the employer, because sometimes the contractor is the one that's supplying the platform, not the employer, but the other party, they end up duplicating the data, making their own data silo to try and keep a copy of everything that's going onto the system, because they're afraid that that they don't quite trust that system. The blockchain has an ability to be able to timestamp and validate all the information, but it's particular to each party pays for their data. Each party would then look after their particular data, and I think this is where a blockchain presents a solution to this problem.
So May, from the legal aspect and with your background as on that side, as you start to see more construction technology, more digitalization being introduced, people obviously need to think about how they manage risk better. And maybe actually even what Michael was talking about there is one aspect of using, in terms of using blockchain. But what are you seeing? How would you be advising people to think about how they better manage their risk and embrace these types of technologies?
I think one of the issues is that people aren't thinking about how things have changed. So it's not just a matter of exchanging emails. If you're using the cloud or blockchain, or you're using new technologies such as drones, how are you gathering your information, all the different ways of both compiling the information, exchanging them have an implication on your risk and who does what, when, and how. And I think what a lot of people need to do is start from the beginning with a blank piece of paper and say, what could go wrong? Okay, who should take that risk? Either via process, do we need to maintain records? Do people need insurance? Rather than just what people are doing at the moment is say a client will say, do some BIM or use drones on the site. Like, well, what do you actually mean? And it's unfortunately, because they're all very new areas, it's necessary to be more detailed than we would in something that is very understood. Because your understanding and my understanding will be very different if someone just says, use this technology to carry out your service. And there's also things like where you are using the cloud platform or anything where there's a mutual access of something. Who's responsible if something goes wrong, if something gets corrupted? There's also very common known issues of version control. So if you have an old version of a file and you may not be able to open it on the new version of the software, and how do you, so there's no point keeping a record for 5 years that you then can't open. It's like having a floppy disk. You have the record, but you just can't read it. And I think it is almost ignore the technology, but go back to basics of risk management.
So what I'm trying to understand in a way, I guess, is you talked about at the beginning, you start with a piece of paper, you look at what could go wrong. And I mean, I suppose that could become quite a long list. How do you get that agreement though of these are the risks?
I think inevitably you have to be reasonable. You're never going to be able to cater for every single thing. And I always suggest to people, work out in the list, what are the things that are likely and you're going to lose a lot. It's going to be very expensive or time consuming. And where the things which are unlikely but going to be so catastrophic to your project, and those two categories are the things you really need to deal with in your contracts. There are a lot of projects, I would say, in the world which are using technology which don't have any of the technology in the contracts. They have non-binding documentation. And that's fine when everything's going right, but as soon as something goes wrong, you go back to the contract and you have a long-winded argument about, like the one that Stacy mentioned, what can you rely on and whose responsibility is it? So it is a matter of sitting down with the other side, and people underestimate the power of just talking to each other. But you can't just rely on talking, because the person you're talking to now isn't going to be the same person looking at the project in 2-3 years if something goes wrong.
Yeah, very interesting. And of course, sometimes people use common words but have different understandings of what those common words mean as well. So the theme of this discussion is to look at whether technology can ensure projects never reach claims situations. So I guess chucking in lighting the litmus paper, perhaps, Alain, if you talked about weaponizing, using technology as a weapon almost. So if the industry is weaponizing technology as part of its claims culture, how can construction technology and digitalization be used to counter this and ensure projects do run on time, on budget, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's right. I have to be really careful because I'm surrounded by lawyers here. So I'm just going to say, allegedly, or industry is a claims industry, allegedly, or industry is a risk industry. And for somebody that came now 13 years ago to industry, it is shocking to discover that the people that build the world are called contractors, because what they are spectacularly good at is managing contracts, writing contracts. And then the next thing that we discover is that they are talking about risk. At no point do they talk about building better. And I think that is really what we are asking ourselves here. Look, we've been in this panel for a few minutes now, and quickly it went around, and let's review the risk, and let's talk about the dispute, and let's see how we're going to resolve. And when we're putting more technology, we're creating more risk. I said, wait a minute. you're really looking at a mechanical horse here. You're looking at it the wrong way. So when we are looking at construction, why is it that, for example, you're talking about contracting? Oh, because you've fundamentally broken down the process. There is nobody that's in charge of actually constructing and creating an end-to-end construction process. That's clearly is evidenced. It's 1995 research from Stanford. The second thing that we notice is right, what are these famous risks then? Where did they arise? And it's really interesting that as soon as you align the technology to those risks and look at what's their rate of eventuation and which one could be tackled or removed through technology, you actually eliminate about 75% of those, either through elimination of risks that weren't never there, right? Now, there are geological risks, I get that. There are market risks, I get that. But an interface risk should never exist. Just don't put a contract on an interface and don't let anybody describe it. Use technology to represent fully, right, how much of the building is invented and designed and integrated at site. Like, I'm turning up, I'm installing, oh no, it's not as it should be. So what does the industry does? It says, I'm gonna laser scan this so that I won't pay the guy until, and I'm saying, this is insanity. How much laser scanning is going on in an integrated production process like a car factory? Do you really think that we laser scan the car midway through to see if the seat's gonna fit? No, of course not. It's been built so that the seat fits. If you do not build the system to fit with the other part, the continuous integration of the process, if it breaks down, the factory stops. This is something that's been invented in the 1970s. It's called flow. That's how you transform an industry. It's immensely powerful. You do not digitize the old way, you rethink a better way. And I think what's very important here is we should not be asking the question, how do I use this technology to improve the dispute resolution? Is how do I eliminate disputes? How do I put a completely new contract framework where the integrated process works better? And is this industry full of lawyers and contract people and claims department, allegedly, ready to stop investing in claims department and start investing in building better? That is for me the fundamental question. And can you weaponize the technology not to do the bad thing, sue each other, and instead use the technology to do the right thing, which is build better, please?
So Shawkat, I would say companies don't set out to end up in a dispute or a claim. It's not the desired end point, but it does happen. So what do you think about, what Alain is saying, and how do we change? How does it change?
As consultants in the claims field, when we go to clients, whether they're contractors or employers, we go and sit and we dissect the entire story. We dissect the contract. We kind of dissect it in a way to understand how it works and the algorithm of it, okay, together with all the documents. So, I agree with Alain in the sense that, yes, we're doing this anyway after the disputes happened. We might as well do this from the beginning when we are designing the algorithm and the technology, see where the contradictions are, see whether it works or not, and automate it at the same time. So it's like killing two birds in one stone, and it's the same effort. We're just doing it now after the dispute. We can do it beforehand, and it requires the same type of people, the same type of know-how, who understands all eventualities. So they will look at the contract, dissect it. Also, they can identify what's missing there. There are some formulas which could not exist there, which are usually the gaps and cause of disputes. And the only way to realize this is through this exercise, which is developing not the technology per se to begin with, the process itself. So, I agree that this can be done, and this is the way to do it. So it's more of inventing something to prevent it rather than allow it to happen and then to go ahead and sort it with the technology. Yeah.
So I can see we're getting a lot of questions coming through, which is great. We will get to those in about 15 or so minutes. May and Stacy, I think from your sides, from your point of views, what, again, if Alain is saying, start thinking about using technology differently, don't use it to help your claim, use it to make sure you never get to a claim. Okay, from the legal standpoint, what did you think of his comments? Stacy and then May.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I don't, you know, as the others have said, you know, I don't think parties use technology, you know, going into it to weaponize it and to, you know, be sort of that vindictive, as it were. So, I've not really come across that. But when you do get yourself into a situation, you know, you look to find out what happened, and you're going to use any sort of technologies that are available. And I entirely agree with that these technologies can be implemented, you know, beforehand to be used for the, you know, the greater good of the built environment. And if you you know, bring everyone together and just, you know, discuss just what those outcomes and what those use cases are, and everyone's on the same page, you're likely to get more dialogue about what if, can we, will this work, and get, you know, more of that collaboration going, and using that technology, you know, in the right way. May, I no doubt you've got other examples.
Yeah, and May, I mean, also, I guess on top of that, what's the role for BIM, for instance? I mean, that must be something that can actually push the industry towards this point where people understand, particularly if they're using some of the more complex parts of BIM, you know, understand budgeting, time sequencing, etc. That must help a lot.
Definitely. I think a lot of disputes happen because of late variations, there's additional costs, and there's a disagreement as to who should bear it, or there's a problem and it's not clear who's at fault, and you have to go through piles of documents to work that one out, and people start pointing fingers. I don't think that people weaponize technology intentionally, but obviously if something goes wrong, you do use everything you can. In terms of BIM, it can avoid a lot of disputes and issues. For example, it needs early contract involvement. So everyone who has a view, relevant view, is involved at an earlier stage. And a contractor can say to the designer that won't actually work. You can pick up using 4D BIM, so using the time element, you can effectively do a virtual build of your project. And I've seen how that can avoid health and safety issues. There's been a couple of instances where they realized cranes just certain things wouldn't work in the way they intended. In the old days, you would have gotten to site, found that out, and then had an argument as to whose fault it was. You also have the very powerful clash detection. So again, the architect does his design, the engineer does theirs, and they compare it and they say, well, okay, we need to amend these bits of our design so everything works seamlessly. Whereas we all know of instances where people get to site and a contractor is trying to put something and he says, well, it's just not going to work. Should I move it a meter to the left? It's going to cost me two extra weeks. And it's things like that. It just streamlines the process. What it also does on a more sort of softer level is it forces people to collaborate more. And so if you're sitting down and you have to have a meeting every 2 weeks to talk about BIM, problems are going to come up. And so you can avoid them before they become a big issue rather than not talking. And by the time you realize it's a bit too late, because people are still hesitant to, understandably, to reveal if there is a problem. So sometimes it's sort of, you have to have a process that obliges that to happen.
Because Michael, again, I would have thought that some of the technologies that are being used, which are trying to make sure that a build is following the correct path, and Alain mentioned laser scanning, I would have thought things like some of these technologies are actually there again to pick up any problems early and make sure that things get back on track. So again, I guess from your point of view, you're a technology expert. What are you seeing, and are there ways, for instance, that blockchain can help here?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, blockchain is part of a solution. It's not going to save the world, as one person has said, but it is part of it, potentially a solution. Alain's absolutely right in that the industry, for a long time, people have been looking at the industry and saying, why do we do things this way? Why can't we do things differently? And there's a number of people that have put forward sort of alternative scenarios. You know, one scenario is, well, actually, why do we have to build? Because ultimately the problems occur in construction because of the differing party interests and the competing party interests. And so, you know, how can we perhaps change those or align those interests, and can we look at a different model? So that's one potential solution where people have discussed, you know, whereby instead of everybody owning an asset of some sort and owning a house, you know, can we not have some sort of a model whereby everything is rented and interests are aligned in a different manner? Now, you know, technology has the ability to make that sort of thing possible, because whereas in the past, you know, that would involve a lot of very difficult and complicated calculations and thoughts about who owns what and how you rent it and etc. Technology allows us to do that and monitor that. You know, the other thing I've seen people discuss is, well, where's construction going? Is it ultimately going to end up as the contractor is just really sitting in a control room and everything is run by robots and the AI? And that potentially is another end solution to the construction process that would perhaps you know, resolve things. But all these things are assisted by technology, particularly the Internet of Things and the ability to put sensors on more and more pieces of equipment and labor and the actual building itself, through to artificial intelligence, which can then resolve, and in a dispute context, it will eventually get as far as, you know, things being decided by artificial intelligence rather than courts and tribunals, and that process has already started. So
Okay.
so eventually, you know, artificial intelligence will come in that as well. So I think AI and the Internet of Things, combined with big data, combined with blockchain, all of these things together have the potential to enable a different model.
And Stacy, you mentioned data earlier, and it's come up a lot today, actually, data. We had a whole session, actually, about an hour and a half ago on data. So are the pitfalls of data management, which are going to become more and more important as there is more digitalization, are they understood well enough?
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough how data and documents and, you know, information are so important to evidencing, you know, your claim for payment or evidencing your claim in a formal dispute resolution. And, you know, from what I see, you know, parties spend, you know, so much time trying to just find that data. You know, witnesses, you know, people who have been on the project was years ago, you know, the project was 10 years ago, or it finished however long ago. And now they're trying to find that data. They're trying to find the people to talk to just to evidence their case. And it's just so important to you know, evidence your claim on a legal basis. And with you know, the amount of data exists in database that's generated during the course of a construction project. Just keeping on top of it is such a mammoth task. And then can you access it? Can you find it 10 years later when you're trying to? I mean, we see cases day in and day out, and we ask, the company, well, where do we get this? Where do we get, the communications? Oh, well, that was on project wise, that, whatever common data environment. I'm not sure if we still have access to it. Let's just try this login. Do you know what I mean? People are trying to find that data, and you spend a lot of time and money just trying to find it, to evidence it. So, and and it's a mammoth task. There's, data silos are, common. Yeah, so it's fundamental to claims, I'm afraid.
So, I mean, the number we have got, there are so many questions here. So what I'm going to do is I think I'll leap to we'll talk very quickly about smart contracts, and then let's go through some of these questions because there are so many. So Shawkat, I almost hesitate to ask this, but the Middle East report that you come out with every year looks at the value of claims, how long disputes take to resolve. I know that in the Middle East, and it's a global report, I know, but in the Middle East, the value of claims was about $62 million in 2019. The time to resolve disputes about 17 months. Obviously, this is higher than the global average. So what do you think this is saying about the way contracts are done?
Well, I mean, here in the Middle East region, clients tend to use bespoke contracts. So they take standard forms of contract and change it considerably. I mean, each client or developer or entity has their own form, which is, usually a big deviation from the standard. I mean, in other global countries, you don't find that much. They stick to as much as possible to the standard. So this change causes a lot of ambiguities and uncertainties in the contract. I mean, we're currently working on a big design and build project where, we're finding about 200 contradictions in the entire contract document. You find, in one part it tells you something, so the contractor gets paid based on a certain condition, and then you get another part of the contract where it tells you exactly the opposite. So these kind of things cause uncertainty, cause contradictions, and basically you can't actually, assess it unless you get the experts, you get the lawyers, and actually, go into, it becomes very legal to decide on that. So this is one of the biggest reasons of that, and that's in addition to, other reasons, in terms of the standard of claims, the standard of the assessment of variation orders here in the Middle East. I mean, you find the practitioners who can do that are, global. They're found globally. There aren't as many here in the region, but it's improving with time. So that's what we found in the report as the main reasons to the difference. And
I think I'll combine this question for May and for Michael, which is, let's look at smart contracts. Now, smart contracts have been talked about as a potential for and the future of construction, but construction is really complex. So it's very hard to put together a contract which is going to know, as May said at the beginning, you have to think about all the things that could go wrong and then try and build that into a smart contract as well. So are smart contracts the answer? And if they are, how do we start to use them in this industry? How can they start to flow outwards?
I think, when people think of smart contracts, it's not going to be like there is a smart version of FIDIC or there's a smart version of a JCT contract. It's a number of steps. You can have one type of contract that deals perhaps with payment, something that deals with inspections and related to inspections. So discrete parts of the contract can be made into a type of smart process. There are certain difficulties at the moment with some of the very difficult things where human judgment is required. I think I would defer perhaps to May, because she's perhaps more an expert on all of these types of things. But I can see a future for it, but it's going to be a long road. And the first step, of course, is getting a distributed data, a blockchain type of solution, which you can build a smart contracts onto with all of the parties.
May?
I think one of the quotes I hear most often about smart contracts is it smart or even a contract? And I think that really captures the point. It's not a replacement for a written contract as such, at least not yet. It's more of a facilitator to operate certain parts of the contract. And one of the sort of non-techie explanations I've heard, which explains this, is that it's like a vending machine. You decide, you push a button, and you get the packet of green M&Ms, even if you change your mind halfway through. So it's useful for things like payment retentions, is one of the main things it's always been talked about. So you say, if this happens, then the subcontractor gets paid. Certainly payment's a big issue in our industry. But it does need human interaction, because how will the computer know at this stage whether they have exercised reasonable skill and care? Certain things that require subjective judgment are less suitable or will require more human intervention. And so it doesn't mean smart contracts can't be used, but it's working out at which stage does a person actually need to push the button. Another way I've seen it used quite well is in document production processes. So it enables more traceability of the goods, provenance of the goods. So when you get the goods and materials, it is what you ordered. And that comes from the fact the data and the information from the smart contract, from the blockchain, is more believable. But there are various issues we have to deal with, such as how will a court consider smart contract? Are they going to say, yes, it's an enforceable contract? Or are they going to say, no, it's a bit of code that sits underneath the contract? We don't really understand that. And until we do, we almost need a written contract to explain what the party's understanding is in terms of the smart contract and how they want it to operate. And again, goes back to who's responsible if it goes wrong, if there's a human input error. So the coding doesn't actually do what the parties wanted it to do. And it is, I would say, very, very useful, but more in a finite way. But that will progress as AI and machine learning progresses.
So complicated still at the moment. Like I said, we have a lot of questions, so I'll start going through this. If it's clear to me who should answer them, I'll say your name. If it's not, I'll throw the question out, and one of you can put yourselves forward. So first things first, can a digital model be the contractual source of information rather than relying on unmanaged 2D contractual documents? Is that, somebody can answer that?
If I can comment on that, I think you can make anything you want a contractual document. One of the problems is a model's quite changeable. So you would have to say this version of the model. And there is a court case in the Netherlands on that point, where they issued a model as a tender document for information only, and they went to court to argue whether the model was a contractual document, and they held that it wasn't because it was only issued for information. So you will always have the argument as to which version of the changeable model is contractual.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's a very good question, because what underpins it is actually saying, wait a minute, as May just said, you can make it contractual or not, but that can be answered legally. The question for me is process-wise, do you want to? Let's all picture Museum of the Future on Sheikh Zayed Road. Do you think that you want to contract something that is a torus, that is immensely complicated to build and assemble, and you want to contract it on flat plates, right? On flat, this problem is something that's been known for centuries. When we try to map the world and put it on a flat world, we had to describe the earth on flat piece, and I own this piece of land and I don't own this piece of land, and we had Mercator invent mathematical projection to solve this problem. Of course, you can contract it on 2D, but surely in the 21st century, we're gonna be contracting the data. Now, of course, it means that designers and contractors are gonna have to be great at managing data. If I really re-ask the question, can a digital model be a contractual source? My question is not, can I legally make it a contractual source? Is, does your data and process management of data, is it robust enough? Is it qualified enough that you can actually transact on it like a bank does, like a credit card company does, like Emirates does? Because I don't, looking around in the industry, see many companies that claim to be digital, but actually could contract because they don't truly use the technology to build better.
Okay, so Stacy, did you have a comment as well?
I probably did. My comments probably changed now to what Alain has said.
In that case, let's go to the second.
I just want to say that I don't think the legal issues should keep you back for a better built environment, for new technology. It shouldn't be the legal issues that hold you back. Of course, we all need to think about it because you don't want to end up in the wrong spot at the end of the day. But you don't start from that point. As Alain has just described.
Okay, so another question here: do AI systems pass beta testing mode, and are there technical and legal obstacles that have to be overcome? I guess when you need to use them.
I missed the first half of the question, so I apologize.
It's asking about the use of artificial intelligence, and are there technical and legal obstacles that have to be overcome for them to be used?
There's certainly from a technical point of view, many issues in terms of using AI at the moment. It's a new technology, it's developing. There's, for example, in disputes, there's a question of bias and inherent bias, and whether an AI system at the end of the day is reliant on the information that's fed in and the information it learns, and somebody has to provide that. So I think very much in the future, whereas at the moment there's a lot of emphasis on what's written in a contract, in the future, our legal friends are going to have to be more au fait with what's behind the data and how it's created, and some of the science behind data science, etc. Because the arguments will not be, there will be a set of data which everybody will agree on. There will be an AI perhaps which decides things, but then it has that AI. Does it have any bias in it? And at the moment, this is a question which you look at a big question when you look at courts and you look at arbitration. Inherent, is there any bias? Is a big question, but that won't go away with AI.
Okay, next question. I'm going to try and cycle through as many of these as I can. The next question is about the role of government in mandating regulations around data management. So I think maybe Stacy, and should they also penalize discrepancies?
I may not be the best person on that one, but I think by discrepancies in data management, or are we talking sort of?
I think they mean in data, but essentially they're asking, should there be government regulations mandating the use of how data management is used?
Well, I mean, this probably speaks a little bit to standards in the industry, and what's developing in terms of those standards, or a lack of standards or guidance in particular areas. The more government projects that mandate certain things in certain areas certainly drives forward innovation and transformation. So definitely a government lead always helps in a lot of situations. Okay,
I have one here which is on the MEP side. Do you think that incorrect use of BIM, MEP equipment, if not selected properly at the design stage, will cause incorrect use of BIM. This is what's being asked. Will it cause incorrect use of BIM?
Yeah, well BIM is not going to resolve that type of an issue, because that is it's a bit like you know, Alain was saying earlier on. You know, technology is a tool which can assist, but some of the issues you will have. I don't think that BIM would resolve that type of a discrepancy.
But I think it speaks to a really good point that I think links the process and the contract. Ultimately, what I think what's very surprising to somebody that comes to this industry is how much effort we spend designing and then representing this design or in answer to the brief into a set of documents, which are the tender documents. And so we use BIM to create those tender documents. And as the gentleman says, at that time, by definition, because you want to maintain commercial flexibility, you describe the MEP equipment as a descriptive functional specification and performance specification, not a specific, this is what I will, I want to buy a ventilation system that has this performance and made up of these bits. The contractor then redesigns it to achieve the same performance, and there's a huge amount of redesign going on, so that the client inherits lots of risk, very inefficient process. We do a redesign, and then in the model, that specifier now is actually specifying the right equipment and a full representation of what would be built, the so-called construction model. It is worth asking the question, is that the most efficient? Do we have evidence? Yes, we do have evidence. We have Katera, we have Goldbeck. If you look at their efficiency curve and productivity curve compared to the general industry, you see that they're 10 to 15% more efficient, that every year they become more efficient. However, they contract completely differently. They do not let the customer say, do a design, then after that, contract, and everybody invest a lot of time to contract, subcontract, subcontract. Is this very much like the process of buying a car? When I want to buy a car, I go into Toyota and I can't specify and order a Ford. It's contractually not possible. Ford has designed a car, Toyota has designed a car, and the market interface is at that point, the moment you open the door and go into that dealership. Guess what? If you set up contract that way, like it's increasingly happening, you can actually get a construction industry that performs much better, that's optimizing through an integrated delivery product. Now, it does not work for everything, does not work for every topology, but it's very instructive to notice that suddenly you unlock productivity gains that so far have been elusive for the old way of buying and contracting buildings.
Final question, and I think it's a little broad, but maybe people can nail it down a little bit, which is how are companies joining up big data for BIM operation, for BIM/operations/legal, etc. on projects?
I think, you know, from what I can see, there's no uniform answer to that. There are some large companies, particularly some of the larger contractors, that are heavily investing in a common data environment, and are looking therefore to you know, to digitalize everything and have it all in a system. The problem with construction is you have a chain, and that starts okay with an employer and a contractor who very often, but not always, are quite big entities. Then you go down the chain to the subcontractor, subcontractor, and suppliers, and these are very, very small companies who can barely produce something in CAD, let alone BIM. So, you know, you have this disparity that you have to deal with the industry when you talk about the construction industry as a whole, and the big employers and big contractors are grasping it and dealing with it. But what about the rest?
Okay, so I know I said final question. This really is the final question. One's just come in that I quite like, so I'm going to ask it, and then we will bring it to a close, which is, are we looking for a different procurement approach to reduce contractual disputes?
I would suggest yes, eventually, because we need one that's more collaborative and works on the basis of people working together. There's a lot of talk now of multi-party contracts, but because that's such a foreign concept for most people, it will be some time yet. But for now, I would say we need to move beyond the more adversarial versions of contracts and ones where people are obliged to collaborate.